Good evening, and welcome to the 285th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Stories Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on text and image work, comics, animation, and illustration. And the series is now made possible in part by a grant from the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation. Our guests tonight are all involved in the new edition of World War III Illustrated. That's the 51st edition. World War III Illustrated was founded back in 1979 by Seth Tobocman and Peter Kuper as a journal dedicated to using comics as a medium for serious social commentary and reporting. Seth Tobocman's work has appeared in the New York Times, Heavy Metal, and many other magazines. He's the author of a number of graphic books, including War in the Neighborhood, Disaster and Resistance, and most recently, The Face of Struggle. Peter Kuper is a cartoonist, illustrator, and teacher. His graphic novels include Ruins, Kafkaesque, and most recently an adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Peter and Seth will introduce the other panelists. So take it away, Peter.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everybody. As it happens, actually, we have a great connection with Ben going back to our very first issue where he did typesetting back in 1979. This is what World War III looks like, by the way. It's a book size, magazine size thing. We've been doing it for 41 years now, and it's a labor of love. So I want to talk a little bit about our history. So I'm going to go back fairly far. So really the history of the narrative art, sequential art, goes all the way back to cave painting and this desire that we've all had to leave some mark and indicate what we were doing, and that, you know, the adventures we've had, the circumstances that we encountered. And if it weren't for art like this, we'd have no idea what our shopping habits were. So that, thank goodness that somebody left this behind. That actually is Banksy, who put this up in the British Museum. It lasted there for 2 weeks before somebody noticed that there was something very wrong in the prehistoric section. So our first language is in pictograms. So I think it's really in our DNA to understand storytelling. And there's the Mexican codexes that thankfully there was a friar that didn't want to burn every one of them. So there's a few remaining remnants of this from the period of the conquistadors, and they read like a comic. Perhaps some of you were reading these comics when you were younger. Little storytelling, panel to panel, sequential, very much like this tapestry from the 12th century that was the history of the world, done in comics, as far as I can tell. Diego Rivera's murals, I noticed when I was in Mexico, are very much that too. The sequential idea of there was recurring characters. The bottom panels told one ongoing story, and there was a bigger history of Mexico being told throughout the image that you would be reading. There's the recurring character here, who's also here as he's selling out Mexico to the conquistadors, and there's Cortez there and also here. So he really was storytelling in very much of a comics way. We're walking in the footsteps in World War III with some giant shoes, artists like Goya. There's always been that reaction of artists who are not only compelled to do portraits of royalty, but also to step out and talk about what's happening in the world around them. Um, Goya did this in Disasters of War. And these are just sort of the forefathers of the kind of work that we were doing. Damier did this portrait of King Louis Philippe and ended up spending 6 months in jail courtesy of this. Thomas Nast brought down Boss Tweed, who was running a corrupt organization in New York. And through his cartoons, he was, when Boss Tweed fled the country, he was captured in Portugal based on the drawings that the customs officials saw done by Thomas Nast. Woohoo! Art in power. Magazines like The Masses that were capturing what the perfect soldier in World War I looked like. It's Robert Miner. In Germany, there was Simplicissimus, and that was giving a voice to artists like Kathy Kollwitz, John Hartfield, George Gross. And this was the way they were getting their ideas out there, and in many cases had to flee Germany when the Nazis came in. Picasso doing, referencing Guernica, the bombing of Guernica in this painting. So fine art, and across the board, the illustrators, fine artists had their toe in the water of social political commentary. This is Ben Shahn. Another important factor for politics meeting with humor in this case is Mad Magazine, which had an influence on a great number of people, including people like Robert Crumb. When Seth and I grew up reading underground comics, this is one of the ways that I was learning about politics was through comics like this. This is on every college wall, and it was like a version of a fist in the air, but obviously a lot lighter. Growing up in the 70s, there was this ubiquitous image of the smiley face, and I really wanted to do happier art, but circumstances did not allow for that. And one of the bigger circumstances was when Seth and I were in art school at Pratt Institute was the idea that Ronald Reagan, this C-rated actor, was going to become president. And he did, though he may or may not have recalled that. But he did promise a less bureaucratic shadow government, which was lovely of him. So that inspired the title World War III Illustrated. And when we first started this, we were thinking about the war that was going to happen with Russia, because there was really a lot of, there was a whole anti-nuclear movement, and there was a sense that at any moment we could be in a nuclear war that would end it all. So we were talking about these world issues and things that we were reading in the newspaper, but very quickly we realized that we could talk about what was going on in New York City, on the streets, and that was the microcosm of what was happening in a bigger picture in the world, and that it was something that we could talk about with personal experience. And year after year, many artists, and as this was true from the very beginning, this wasn't a vanity press, the idea was that we would publish other artists' work that we saw on the streets that would maybe be put up as a poster and would vanish in the first rain. And this was a way to capture it and say that this history, which wasn't very often being reported in mainstream media, wasn't going to go away, that we'd at least grab it, codify it, and say that there are people who disagree with the direction that this country is going. And this was a huge group of people involved, and this group of people joined forces to make it possible for the magazine to continue. And there's no way that we'd still be doing the magazine today if it had not expanded with other editors and other artists carrying the whole process through and making it possible to do what we're doing with the magazine. And so often we saw things coming and were, that's covered by Eric Drucker, and were commenting on things that you saw very little of in the mainstream press: police brutality, prison system, what was going on in our immediate vicinity and in the world around us. and lots of personal experience. That's by Isabella Bannerman. And we did anthologies. That's James Romberger's cover about the riot that happened in New York City in 1988. When 9/11 happened, it was a moment where we all were very conscious of how important it was to have an outlet like this, to have alternative media, because in general, all media was shut down to anything that wasn't kind of a war fever enthusiasm to attack somebody and to support the president. And we had personal direct experience that we could express, and we had an outlet through the magazine where we could do more than a spot illustration for some place. And there was the way censorship works is very often is they just don't publish what you do. It's not like they necessarily say you can't do that. It's just like, oh, that wasn't right, and it doesn't make it into any visible form that is in more mainstream. Mac McGill did that cover. Mirko Illick did this. This is the issue we did before we went into Iraq, where we were saying, hey, really good idea if we don't do that. This is really this is a repeat of Vietnam Plus, and this isn't going to get us anywhere. And so we've been at this for quite a while. This is our last anthology that covered up to 2014. We've been talking about climate change probably since just about the first issue, and continue in that area. So to bring things up to date, here we are with the fifth Rider of the Apocalypse that has been now introduced. And yes, I scream. But nobody likes an "I told you so." So it's kind of hard sometimes to yell about these things and go, we were saying that we shouldn't have gone into Iraq, and we were saying this, and somehow or another we didn't stop that movement. But one of the things that World War III can be is it's an umbrella in a storm. It's a place that people can come where they can talk about these things, they can express these ideas, and it gives us a forum for them. And really, sometimes it feels like we're throwing rocks, pebbles in the ocean, but the fact is you don't know what impact you're having with what you do. It's not for us to say. It's a collective effect, and the things that have changed people's minds, that have created politically inclined individuals, come from all sorts of places. Nobody's born political. This is something that develops from the things that you see and read. So about this current issue. So when we started way back in the prehistoric time of 2019, we thought we were going to be talking about pressing issues like climate change and the election, the upcoming election. We thought it was going to be a discussion between fascism and the socialism of Bernie Sanders, perhaps. And so this is the piece that I was developing, talking about, reminiscing about my experience traveling around the world over the many years. And yes, mea culpa, I've flown a lot, and I have a rather large carbon footprint. Oops, sorry about that. Oh, the joy of computers. So this is just basically, I just did a piece where I was looking back on all the things that I have had the really great fortune to see, the places I've gone to visit gorillas in Rwanda, to go to Ecuador, to go to Guatemala, to go to the Galapagos, Kenya, and New Guinea, and see these amazing places, and a chance to see the world that's there, but also see what's happened to the world, and return and recognize that these beautiful, amazing things that fill my heart to the brim are also disappearing at a horrific rate. And I don't want this just to be my experience. I want this to be the experience that our children's children, future, can see, and not just be something that's in history books. To quote Charles Darwin, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And here we are at a moment in time where we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to change our course so that life on Earth can survive? And this whole point of what it is that we're fighting for, what's worth fighting for. So as I said, we thought we would be talking a lot about Trump and the election, upcoming election, which we certainly did in the issue, and all his incredible, shocking, mind-numbing, mind-blowing actions separating people at the border. These actually were images of people who managed to get back together, thankfully. The invasion of our dreams is Rebecca Migdal's series of dreams these are from the latest issue. Deb Luck's examination of the greatest witch hunt in the United States. I go with number 2, which is that Trump is actually a witch. And Ben contributed to this issue wonderfully, thankfully, happy to have him as part of this. So what we were doing with this issue was also trying to find the hope and the direction that we can go with what we're doing that will suggest the possibilities of another world that we can get to. But a lot of things came up in the time that we were working on the issue that caused us to, more than pause, come to full stop and say, what are we going to be talking about in this issue? Because we have to address what's going on really on a day-to-day basis. And that things change so dramatically, or actually I should say in many ways with the Black Lives Matter movement, it was a continuation of something that had been going on that reached a fever pitch and brought people to the street. Another little factor that came in there while we were working on the issue was a curious change in Trump's circumstances with, and how ironic that this image that Mac McGill did that shows Trump forming into a germ, that germ became a recipient of the germ. So artists were doing what they should do, which is responding to the world around them. And people like Anton van Dalen kept a notebook about his drawings while on lockdown. Steve Brodner was drawing images of people who had died from COVID. And I just want to say, as we're going down this dark road, that important to remember, there will be a point where we will be able to hug again, and we'll keep hugging for all it's worth. Thank you, Linears. So one of the dramatic effects of this pandemic is that things have been on the table, like say, stopping evictions and a long list of possibilities of how we can actually be changing the world that are in the plus category to something that is quite negative. And we are together on our way out and through. And we're just getting warmed up. So now I'll turn to Sue Coe, who started working in the magazine in the 80s and is still working on it today. She was one of the people that inspired me to do political art and perpetually lifted up by the power of her work. And she will tell you more about that. Sue, you want to unmute and...
Yep, that should work.
It does.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Peter and Seth, for inviting me. And I've always said it's worth mentioning the extraordinary generosity of Seth and Peter in starting World War III and being so kind. They're just very kind people. That's why they get so many artists to work for them, work with us. It's a kindness that goes through the decades now. So thank you. This work added to the latest issue. I just was reminded when I saw the cover, Peter just ran that. I got arrested at that. That was in Berlin, that demonstration. I got dragged in the back of a paddy wagon.
this first.
Yeah, that one. Because Ronald Reagan visited Berlin the exact same time I did. And I didn't know that. I was just going to Berlin to look at culture, you know, and Bertolt Brecht said, culture is like a palace built of dog shit. Well, as Ronald Reagan was there, naturally I had to get arrested, which was horrifying because they kept saying I'm just a tourist. Okay, next. We can go to the next one. The birth of fascism. Backwards, back a bit.
There we go.
Yeah, so I removed women from this process, and it's tricky with fascism because this is an American fascism I'm referring to, with this book just out, American Fascism, not German, that it's very exclusive to America what's going on. So this is referencing that Trump comes from monopoly capitalism, or now we'd say neoliberalism, being birthed by neoliberalism. Next, please. And behind it all is McConnell, who's the wealthiest, absolute wealthiest politician in America. He's packed his pockets, and he will get rid of Trump. He's starting to now. It's not in his interest if he's going to lose. But this is, you know, obviously a reference to John Hartfield. And Moscow Mitch can't find a racist bone in Trump's body. And he's throwing gasoline all the time. And, you know, so capitalism is pushing McConnell, who's the glove puppet there is Trump. So we can remove Trump, hopefully, but we won't remove that. That's why you have to plan ahead. Next, please. This is, he incites fascist violence, and the Bible wasn't upside down, it was back to front. A most terrifying scene. And I'm quite frankly, you know, with democracy, it's like a chalk drawing on a wall of a door. And we keep opening the door to meet a wall. And we're going to do it one last time in this election. We've seen the chalk drawing and we're going to open the door. Next, please. So early on in the pandemic, I started to research through history how many artworks related to the plague. And there's quite surprisingly not many, until you recognize that all art, medieval art, was referencing the plague, but not necessarily directly. And this is Make America Great Again, which comes from the Lindbergh Party, America First, or is it Coughlin? This comes from the 1930s in America, which Trump, obviously with his early exposure to Roy Cohn, understood. So this is the modern version where this character, the doctor at the time, which is, the print is from Versailles, the original print. And he's dressed in leather and the long gloves, so he doesn't touch anything. And the beak is stuffed with herbs because they correctly intuited that it's through the aromas, the environment, the plague was spread. Next, please. And this is coronavirus carnivorous, which happened to be the same letters. And I did this as a print, so I had to do it back to front. It's a bit complicated, but I'm pretty convinced now the virus did not come from the Wuhan market. And I have to go into that further. So this is just what I'm sharing with you as I did it. And the virus was all over the market, which is wet market, which just means they hose the market down. And the virus was there, but I don't think it came from there. But you know, we can't expand on any conspiracy theories. I need actual facts. I'm pretty sure I know where it came from, but I have to find the documentation. Next, please. This is the Dim Reaper, which now that's 250,000. When I did this, it was 110 deaths, with his supporters, who one is revolted by his base, but that's really, they're not the issue. The economics is the crime, not these persons. So, I mean, they're enablers, but they're not the source. So it's difficult to describe the source in art, but we'll try. Next, please. I just, I was reversing QAnon with this first known case of demon-to-demon transmission. And that's the architect of separating children at the border and spreading QAnon conspiracy theories. So I switched it back to him, Stephen Miller. And he did catch COVID from Trump or the other way. So I amused myself with that, and then thought of the children, which is a fascistic force of theirs, which is a disgrace. I mean, of all the disgraces, one can't make a hierarchy of their criminality, but they belong in the Hague Court for War Crimes Against Humanity. Next, please. And this one sort of sums up how I feel today. Dow could go up or down. Death's always good for Dow. And we live in an asylum, USA 2020. And well, World War III did predict, and no one wants to hear that. What people want to hear now is, what can we do next? Well, artists aren't responsible for answering that, thank goodness. Next, please. This is a billboard that just went up, which, yeah, it's nice. So thank you, billboard. The print is actually tiny. That's obviously huge. Next, please. This is cardboard coffins. I saw pictures of all the coffins around the world, just made out of cheap paper, which is more environmental, but it's a horrible thing. And again, this comes from an image I saw about the cholera pandemic back in the 19th century. I think that's all. Next, please. No, it's not all. This was hella difficult to do. I just want you artists to know this, how difficult this work is, because the Republicans were on the right, the Democrats on the left, and I copied their body language exactly. The whispering, the blocking the mic. This is Vinderman testifying. He later was fired. And you do that in a print, so it's reversed. So you can start, oh no, I've just put the Republicans on the left. And one is obligated to do them as they look like, which is also back to front. And so that takes hours and hours and hours. It's a pretty big print, and it's totally not worth it. Fail. Next, please. This is back to Dow Death, and you know, I'm doing this frame from Holbein, which is Dance of Death. And then, you know, the vaccine is being tested on macaque monkeys, which is probably the virus came from testing SARS on the kidney cells of primates. So you can see how fast transmission happens primate to primate. And considering I see other animals as the most creatures who've resisted human oppression, the left should definitely have solidarity with animals. And this is the elephant in the room, you know, completely never discussed. So I think that's all. Thank you.
There's still more.
No. Oy.
Sorry.
Okay. So I'm using the same frame, and the threat to the voting process is immense. And we need to turn out in record numbers. That's basically it. That's it. United. I have to do cute work occasionally. Front against fascism and Trumpism vote. Americans opposed to being gassed, virused, and putting children in cages. I think we can unify around that. Thank you.
I just want to add into this that Sue has a show right now at Gallery Saint Etienne on 57th Street. And if you're in New York City and you get a chance to get to the show, highly, highly recommended.
Thank you.
And you see, and you have hope still.
Oh, I thought you were going to cut these down.
No, I just
cut them down.
No, I used your hopeful drawings.
Okay, so hope is a bird with feathers that flies away usually. But in this case, I think we're going to win. That's it. This is a pretty nice piece now I'm looking at it. Very nice. That works.
We need to end on some hope for sure. So next up is John Vasquez Macias, and he's a teacher, puppeteer. I was at the Brooklyn CAB, the Comic Arts Brooklyn Festival, and I walked by his table, and I was stopped dead in my tracks by his work, and I asked him if he would participate in this issue, and thankfully he said yes. John, you there?
Yep, here I am.
Yay.
Thanks everybody for having me. Before I start, I first saw World War III when I was a snot-nosed punk in the 90s, and it's really trippy and an honor to be part of it today. So really thank you, everybody. I'm talking alongside Sue Coe, who's been such an influence to me. It's amazing. So I'm really excited to be here. Folks, my comic is called The Puerto Rican War, and it's about some events that happened in 1950. Can we see the next slide?
Shall I go on?
Yep, thank you. So in 1950, there was a law where it was illegal to have a Puerto Rican flag, and you can stop right there. It was illegal to have a Puerto Rican flag. It was illegal to sing a patriotic tune. It was illegal to speak about independence. So a few Puerto Ricans under the leadership of Pedro Albizu Campos started to speak about independence illegally and formed an uprising where they took over 2 towns and they tried to assassinate President Truman. It wasn't successful, but it was a very important event and just a part of our history. I feel like nobody really knows about this, about the history of Puerto Rico, so that's what inspired me to make a book about it. And as you can see here, I used the actual blocks. These are woodcuts. I used the actual blocks as the final art objects as I carved them in. The whole book is about 96 blocks. Can we see the next slide? Next. So this is a scene of a battle taking place in the town of Jauja, where they took over the town and they burned the draft cards and they cut the phone lines. It was about 18 Puerto Ricans stuffed into 3 cars. I like to call them the Puerto Rican Army. And as a result, they were bombed by America for their efforts. So as you can see here, I'm using the tropes of woodcut and classic comics. And I think when I was in high school, I was always sort of expecting them to teach us this, which is kind of ridiculous. My high school history was always just Eurocentric. Can I see the next slide? Or is that the, so at the back of the book, I give little bios of all the major characters. And this is a this is a portrait of Pedro Albizu Campos, the leader of the revolt. And again, I've got a woodcut here so you can see that it's actually the blocks of wood. And if you look really closely in the book, you can see all the little scratch marks and all the cut marks. If you're a printmaker and you make an edition of 100 books, your block of wood will usually get all stained with ink. And so I thought, you know what, I want to preserve this block of wood. This will be the final piece. And so I know I whizzed through it. I tried to get a lot of information in at once. But that's basically the whole idea of the book. And I hope that people read it and they can feel a bit more of a connection to Puerto Rico and its plight. So yeah, thanks again for having me.
There's yet another one.
Is there another one?
Yeah, well, that's I think this is the last. But the other thing, doing the lettering probably was infinitely easier, not backwards.
You are absolutely right. This is the most lettering I've ever done in a book. It was easier. I've been a printmaker since the 90s, so I've got nothing to prove. My chops are down. But yeah, you're right. It was easier to do the lettering.
It's the most frightening part about that. Really beautiful work. So this is a self-published book that is available directly from John. You have a website, I presume?
Yeah, JohnVasquezMejias.com.
And we published an excerpt from the book in this latest issue, but it's a much longer piece that you can get directly from John. So I'm going to do one last thing here, which is where are you? No, I have you here somewhere. Sorry, guys. I'll be with you in a moment. And here it is. So this is Elizabeth Hadel. I'm going to let you tell a bit more about yourself. Are you on there, Beth?
Yeah, no, I am.
Okay, I'm going to start this and then I'll let you take it away and give it a little bit of your history. We met, Elizabeth publishes a magazine called Illustoria for young adults. And there it is. And absolutely brilliant magazine. It's basically kind of like World War III for a younger group. Get them while they're young, always a wise choice. And that I saw some work in her sketchbook that just knocked me out, and asked her if she would do something for the issue, and here it is.
I just immediately thought, Peter, when you asked what's worth fighting for, I thought about, you know, that was last fall, and I thought about the young people who are not interested in waiting for adults and leaders to do anything in the interest of the planet and the future. And this is kind of a play on that quote that I can't recall who said that we stand on the shoulders of giants. They were referring to, like, you know, whatever we accomplish, it's a collective effort, you know. And I love that kind of non-egotistical way of looking at change or inventions or accomplishments. And I just pictured, you know, Greta had not yet been named Times Person of the Year, which was wild. But she had really inspired a lot of other kids who were following her actions. And so I had been doing these kind of people piles personally, and I thought it would be interesting to, like, portray the kids all standing on each other's shoulders. So this was just like a exercise that I amuse myself with. There's a couple rules. I always draw without a pencil and don't think ahead, and try to throw one thing nearby into what's basically just kind of a surrealist pile. Is it still playing? There we go. I like to do this when I travel. So I had a couple from New York. I mean, the people watching is so fantastic. All the handbags and the boots. I was really glad I went there last fall, especially when considering that traveling right now is so hard. That was ice skating in Bryant Park. I threw a couple other things in here because Peter, you just said put some things in for context about what else you do. I do comics on the side, but I've always taught, and I have a online class I'm trying out this month for the first time that was aimed at different exercises artists could do to kind of like solve their own problems and kind of be their own art therapy. I was making these inner self-portraits and had fun playing with the animations. There's the first issue of Illustoria. We always feature a youth activist and other published like fiction and poems by other kids like within the magazine. And sometimes we have professional artists do illustrations for the children's work, because we want them to just know that they have a voice at the table and they should be taken seriously. They have great ideas. And talk about hope, Sue. I just feel like the young people really like have a fresh sense of that they can bring. I threw a couple books on the end. I wasn't sure how much we were supposed to talk about previous stuff, but this is a sci-fi graphic novel that I did in collaboration with my brother, Paul Ducoudray. I know sci-fi is something that's getting me through this time because it's great to think way ahead. This is a story I got to illustrate that came out this year. It's a true story about the girl, the 10-year-old girl who named Pluto, the planet Pluto. And then I have another book about famous writers and what they were doing and reading when they were kids. So I felt like kids could see that and then relate to that and see themselves possibly doing that in the future. And then this was my first experience doing a graphic novel with Deb Olin-Unferth. And then this is a picture from age 8. I don't know, Screaming Butterfly. I just thought I would say something about going way back.
I say we should all be so lucky to do something that beautiful at age 8. So Seth, take it away.
Hey. So, talking about this issue, I wanted to start by talking about Mohammed Sabana. I first became aware of Mohammed Sabana when he was in an Israeli prison. Ethan Heitner, who's also an editor on this issue, brought it to my attention that there was a young Palestinian cartoonist who'd been thrown in prison for illustrating a book that the government there didn't like. And, you know, to nuance that a bit, it's really very, very common for young men in Palestine to be thrown in prison on the most absurd charges because the Israeli system allows the government to hold a Palestinian for 6 months without filing charges. So they do this as a way to extract information from people. And it's actually pretty common for any young person in Palestine to spend time in prison. But anyways, Mohammed was in prison, and we put out a statement in his support, and cartoonists all over the world actually signed letters in his support. And when he came out of prison, he became a daily or weekly illustrator for one of the biggest newspapers in the occupied territories out of Ramallah. And he also traveled the world and got his work out there. And he's now got a book in English for an American audience called White and Black. And I'd like to show you the piece that Muhammad did for this issue.
Hi, I'm sorry since I cannot to be with you even with the videos or broadcasting or Zoom because I'm still traveling between Palestine and the UK since I cannot travel back because of the coronavirus and the situation. But I want to just explain the artwork that I have participated with World War III magazine. The artwork that I called, it's one of my series, big mural about some issues. I've done one or two about the Palestinian history, one about the human history, one about the women's issues, and one about the environment that I have participated with World War III magazine in. And this mural, I call it mural because it's talk about one issues and the time frame for all of these issues during the human history. And in this one, I try to talk about the relation between the human being, the people, and the earth, the resources, and all of these things. I have done a lot of research to know exactly the turning point, the main important thing, to talk about the relation between the human being and the earth and the environment. Start from the old nations and all the ancient people and their relation with the earth and how they used to respect the earth. That's what we can see it in the most of the natives people and the natives relation. They have found a lot of turning point in the human history and the relation between the human being and the earth and the environment and all these resources. Some of the scientists say that the agricultural revolution is the most important turning point because the people started, or the human being started deforestation, do this deforestation along very big areas to cultivate this area. And that's how the relation between the human being and the earth have been changed. Some of the scientists thought no, that the industrial revolution is the most significant turning point in this relation or in this sequence. That's why I tried to use the Guernica as and deconstruct the Guernica to take about the relation between the human being and the environment. And out through the pollution in the sea, all of the relation between the human being and all these resources, the oil, the trees, the deforestation, the pollution, and all of these issues. And one of the most important issues that I've talked about is the war, the relation between the war and the pollution, and how it's caused a lot of problem with all these issues. The second thing that I want to talk about it is the technique that I've used. I used the inks to represent my ideas with different color to represent, to be as a signifier for the relation between the human being and the environment and the earth and all of these things. The original artwork is more than 4 meters by 40 centimeters. And I've used a lot of techniques, the inks, the etching, and also try in part of this mural to use the effects or the way how we can do the linoleum cut and the print making. And thank you.
So when we started World War III Illustrated, as the title implies, our first subject material was the possibility of a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And after doing that for a couple issues, we realized that's pretty depressing. And we realized that in order for the magazine to be useful to people, we had to put a real focus on what can you do about it, what are the solutions, and not to be, you know, basically disaster porn. And so that has been an emphasis with the magazine for most of the history of the magazine. And working on this issue, Ethan Heitner made me aware of a younger cartoonist whose work was very much about solutions, and she did a piece for this issue, and that's Colleen Ty, and I'm going to let Colleen Ty read her piece.
Hi. So first off, I just want to say thank you for having me. I feel very honored to be among so many people I really respect, and I do feel very like the kid in the room right now. But so this was a piece originally published in the Baffler that was trying to pull, it's kind of like half comic, half poster series. I was trying to use some of the feeling of the WPA posters from the New Deal, but really reimagine them for a future and kind of try to create a new kind of leftist aesthetic. So I'll start reading it. What we've seen with the development of this pandemic is not just an exposure of the falseness of capitalism, but the fundamental truths of living. That to care and to be cared for is to be human. That the values of capital are nakedly hollow next to the values of community. We are in the gap between before and after. No future is guaranteed. What can we build on the other side of this crisis? What if we built a world around community care? We can build free housing. To have a safe place to rest is not a privilege, but a right. To allow those to go without shelter, while many have 2 or 3 or 4 houses, while luxury skyscrapers remain empty, is a failure. We can give everyone in the world free housing now. As one person suffers in the cold, we all suffer. We can build a green society. We must green our economy, shrink our product demand, and create a healthy food supply system. The world does not only include people, and we must cooperate with the entire ecosystem. As the world burns, we burn. We can build free healthcare for all. There is no person who does not fall ill, and no person that does not grow old. When we take care of the sick and the elderly, we care for ourselves. When we provide better, safer working conditions for doctors, nurses, and caretakers, we build a stronger world for us all. We can care for children together. Childcare and education must be free. When one person learns, laughs, and plays, we grow together. Childcare workers and teachers must be paid reflective of the massive duty they perform to society. We must support children outside of the nuclear family. A child is no one's property, but everyone's responsibility. We can abolish prison. There is no justice system that is omniscient enough to rationalize the torture of locking a human being up. There is no society that can exist around care that looks to punish instead of repair. As long as one person is in prison, we are all unfree. We can build joy, support, creativity, and love. Everyone deserves to know love, care, and support. No one is an island. As we build together, we must make sure not to neglect those neglected by capitalism, sexism, racism, by the trauma power structures create, enforce, and pass down. When we love one person, we love everyone. So that was, I definitely don't have all the solutions. That was a pitch I made because it was an issue about care, but I definitely like using art as a way to imagine an alternate reality. I'm not an organizer right now, but I used to be, and something that was imperative to me was opening up people's imagination towards a different world, because we're just, like, capitalist propaganda is our entire lives, and even be able to break that a little bit as an artist, I think is like one of the most amazing things any of us can do. So thank you.
So now I'm going to get to my own work. I just turned 62 this year. So I've started to think of myself as a time traveler. Like, I come from this strange world where only scientists worked with computers, and there was not a single American soldier in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Saudi Arabia. My students have never lived in such a world. In the 1970s, when we were growing up, there was this very ugly cliche about people on the left, that people would say, well, you're going to be a radical, until you get to be about 25, then you're going to grow up and you're going to turn into a conservative. And I've tried to live my life in such a way that this is not true. I was very politically active when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I have neither the physical stamina nor, quite frankly, the physical courage to do some of the things I did when I was in my 20s, but I still am politically active. So, Peter and Ethan asked me to do a comic strip dealing with some of my own experiences of activism. And so reluctantly, I did. So this is a bit of it. I have just signed legislation outlawing Russia forever. The bombing will begin in 5 seconds. In 1981, Ronald Reagan became president. I was 22 years old. October 1983, 42nd Street. The rush hour crowds were hurrying home. X-rated movie theaters were open for business, and street corner preachers were denouncing sin. No one seemed to notice about 20 of us marching down the middle of the street. The United States had just invaded the tiny island of Grenada to overthrow the socialist government of that country, but no one seemed to care. The march went to Times Square and then broke up. We felt small and powerless. So what do you do when people won't listen to you? That week, I cut my first spray paint stencil. I felt that if the United States could launch this illegal invasion of a small country, I could invade the walls of Lower Manhattan. I had no idea what I was doing. I went out there by myself without any lookouts, and there must have been an angel looking out for me because I didn't get caught. By morning, my hands were covered with paint, the stencil was falling apart, but my message was up on the walls. Now, I never met Michael Stewart, but I studied art at Pratt Institute, and so did Michael Stewart. I lived in the East Village and worked as a busboy, an usher, for moving companies, as a messenger, all kinds of little odd jobs. Michael Stewart lived in Brooklyn and worked as a bartender on the Lower East Side. I was trying to make it as an artist in New York, but Michael Stewart never had the chance to develop his art because he was murdered by transit police. The police were never prosecuted and they kept their jobs. It was very clear to me that there were only two important differences between me and Michael Stewart. The first big difference was that Michael Stewart was Black. And the second difference was that Michael Stewart was dead. So for me, and I think for a lot of other people, the police murder of Michael Stewart was a wake-up call to young artists living on the Lower East Side in the 1980s. On December 12th of 1987, anti-racist protesters shut down 2 lines of the New York City subway system. The December 12th coalition raised a lot of the same issues that today would be associated with Black Lives Matter. These Black nationalists never asked the city for permits for their marches and demonstrations. They took the street in tight formations to avoid arrest and to block traffic. And at these demonstrations, you could usually count the white people on one hand. And these were called the Days of Outrage. If you lived in New York City in the 1980s, you probably knew at least one person who died of AIDS. ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, turned suffering into politics. They held large open meetings where democratic process led to direct action. In the 1980s, the word homeless became a noun. The homeless were a group of people defined entirely by what they did not have. The Lower East Side squatters were breaking into abandoned buildings to provide housing for people. Over time, these squatters provided permanent homes for about 500 people. And so the tragedies of the 1980s led to new forms of resistance. The 3 movements I've described here had a number of things in common. Each organized an oppressed community to fight for its own interests. Each connected local issues to a view of the entire society. Each set clear and attainable goals, and each tried to achieve those goals through direct action. This type of organizing made sense to me at the time, and it still does today. So that's what I was doing then. And this is a piece about our current situation that I did this spring. I don't know if I've got it. You don't know if you've got it. We don't know if it's safe to shake hands or to touch the screen of an ATM or to ride a subway or to shop. I don't know if a walk in the park will kill me. You don't know if hugging your child will kill you. A child doesn't know if hugging a parent will kill that parent. We don't know how many are healthy, and we don't know how many are sick. We don't know because we don't have enough test kits. And we don't have enough test kits because the American government refused to import test kits from Europe. They preferred to invent a test kit of their own, which didn't work. We don't know why they made this very bad decision. They say it's standard procedure. We do know that Donald Trump has blood on his hands because we know that refrigerated trailers are filling up with dead bodies. And so we know that we deserve better. This was written in March of 2020 when we didn't know. So this was the first issue of World War III Illustrated. I'm sure, Ben, you remember that you helped me do the graphic design on this cover. And here we are on our 51st issue. And I'm very proud that this issue includes not only a cover, but some other artwork by an artist that Peter Kuper and I have looked up to for many years, and that's Jose Munoz. And also a long story by Sandy Jimenez, who I will maintain is the best writer in comics today. And if you don't know Sandy's work, you ought to buy this issue or any recent issue of World War III Illustrated to see what Sandy is writing, because he's really an amazing artist and writer. And we also have work by Kevin Pyle, Ben Katcher, Terry Tapp, Carlo Quispe, Sue Szyminski-Biedola. And we also have new artists on board, such as Beck Young, Sasha Hill and Annabelle Heckler, J.B. Bradger, Meredith Stern, Hillary Allison, and the imprisoned queer artists of Abo Comics, Jose Sanchez, Pablo DeLeo, and another one of the editors on this issue, who is Ethan Heitner, and a lot of the new artists who've come into the magazine are people who Ethan introduced us to. And Ethan, with his usual revolutionary humility, chose not to speak at this lecture. But we owe him a deep debt of gratitude for the work he did on this issue and on other issues. So you might be wondering where you can buy this magazine, because right now, a lot of the bookstores in the country are closed. they're starting to reopen, but in many places they're still closed. One way you can get this magazine is by ordering it from AK Press, and this is their email address for ordering the magazine. And if you put that in your computer, you will see this, and it will let you order the magazine. Right now, it's available in hard copy, but in a few days, it will also be available as an ebook. So thank you, Ben, for giving us time to talk about this magazine, and thank you, all of you, for listening to us, and thank you, all of you who are contributors to the magazine, for participating in the book. And I believe that Isabella Bannerman would like to say a few words.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for Ben for hosting this, and Seth and Peter and everybody. And I can just quickly show you the cover of the most recent, not the most recent, but the one before that is called Shameless Feminists, and it was edited by me, and Sabrina Jones drew the cover. And I have a piece inside. There's a lot of pieces inside, but there's I think there's about 23 different pieces. But this is a story. My involvement with World War III Illustrated started in the 80s. I had a friend who was a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital who was taking care of AIDS patients. And he went to Tower Records and he found World War III Illustrated on sale at Tower Records. And he said, you should know about these artists. And little did I know that Seth was living 3 blocks from where I was living. And everything he did made sense because there were homeless people all over the place, and he was working on housing rights. And there were people with AIDS all over the place, and he was concerning himself with that. And so I mostly collaborated with my friend who was a nurse who did the writing, and I illustrated some of his stories. But more recently, my work for World War III Illustrated has been around fascism, because when Donald Trump was first elected in 2016, all of a sudden, my mom had all these memories of living through the Mussolini's regime. And she saw so many similarities between the speeches of Donald Trump and the speeches of Mussolini that she told me all these stories about what it was like to live then. And so I started illustrating her stories. And, you know, there was the perspective of being a child and trying to understand adults at that time. And there was also being a girl and trying to help and trying to figure out the world at that time. So some of her stories are in the most recent issues. And the last thing I want to show you is a cartoon that was inspired. Is it going to show backwards? Is it showing? I don't know if it's showing backwards if I show it to you. So anyway, what it's saying is this is the only mask that Donald Trump won't remove. And it's a Ku Klux Klan mask that he's wearing. Because every time he does something horrible, it's even more horrible than the last thing he does. And there's a really good NYU professor who's come out with a book about, it's called Strongmen. And she's analyzing the dictators of the last century. And she came up with a really good way of analyzing what people like Donald Trump do, which is that they do a transgression that's unbelievable, like putting children in cages, and they get away with it. And they're doing that on purpose so that the next even more horrible thing they do, they also get away with it. And so by the time they do the ultimate horrible thing, like allowing hundreds of thousands of people to die of a disease that could have been prevented, we're all too exhausted and in the midst of chaos to react, and it's already too late. So every step, every transgression builds on the last one. And it still encourages me, it still gives me hope that Seth and Peter and all the other amazing artists are responding and marching and making beautiful banners, and you know, that we're not just standing by silently. So thank you so much.
Since I've noticed that Sabrina is also here. Sabrina, are you able to unmute? And there you are. So, you know, as I mentioned before, there's no way that we would have continued doing this magazine if it weren't for this wide range of people. And one of the critical people is Sabrina, who's been participating, co-edited the last issue, and and also, you know, Ethan Heitner, who was co-editor with me and Seth on this one. But Sabrina, if you want to throw in a few words, by all means, please do, because thank you for many years of dedication to this.
Oh, thank you, Peter and Seth, for making this thing and sticking with it over the years, you know, when it's not like you didn't have anything else to do. But of course, World War III is a special place for all of us, because it is that place that Isabella referred to, that place where we find hope and coming together and resisting the things that we feel powerless against. Just as people, all the new artists are, if you can see, I've been amusing myself a bit with sketching the slideshow here. Really thrilled to see a lot of new artists, and one of whom almost apologized for being new. I'm like, no, you think we want to be a bunch of old farts doing this, a bunch of 60-year-olds, you know? You bring life, thank God. So, congratulations. Do we know who's editing the next issue, or?
Please don't rush us.
Okay.
It's probably going to be a different group or not, you know, if we're going. While we're here, since I see Eric Drucker is also in the house, would you like to unmute and say this or that from California?
There we go.
There you go.
Oh, I could hear myself think. Was there a question or?
No, I just, you know.
It's still light outside because I escaped a lifetime in New York City. I'm living here in Berkeley, California these days. It's great because I got a box of these N95 masks for the global pandemic, you know, but I get to also use them to protect me from the toxic smoke from the wildfires that we've been having here for the past month or two. They're still continuing. They stopped reporting it on the news cycle, but the West Coast of the United States is still combustible. Why should you care on the East Coast? Well, about 90% of the food grown in the United States is grown in the state of California. California is the breadbasket of the US and much of the world, apparently. So, as usual, it's all interconnected, and it's going to have a major economic impact in the upcoming years, probably sooner than we think. It's great, though. I get another 3 hours every day. See, it gets dark there, but it's still daytime here. One other thing I'm going to leave you with, because I know that you guys would appreciate this. Most of my other friends don't really grasp or care, but I know that my poet and writer and artist friends, if you haven't already figured this out, it's probably all obvious to you already, but all of the images and cartoons of Donnie that we've been doing, the question is, should we even portray him at all? Or is that in some strange way just giving him more power, even if we're ridiculing him? is that giving him power based on the first law of public relations. That is, bad publicity is better than no publicity at all. So I haven't really decided that. But I've been avoiding doing caricatures of him. I couldn't help, a couple of times I couldn't help myself, and I did, I think, 2 cartoons of him early on. But it wasn't until about 4 or 5 months ago that it dawned on me who he is, Donnie. He's Trickster. He's not a trickster, he's Trickster with a capital T. It was so obvious, I didn't realize it. But, and you don't have to be Joseph Campbell to figure this out, but he fits all of the characteristics. He's an agent of chaos. This is if you look up trickster in the dictionary. The universal archetype, African tricksters, the signifying monkey, Brer Rabbit, Bugs Bunny, Abby Hoffman, usually the people we love, Groucho Marx, people like this, Lenny Bruce, are tricksters. But the trickster is apolitical. It could go either direction. The trickster doesn't have to be on the left, but the trickster is always an agent of chaos and the patron saint of thieves. So I realized I couldn't think of a better example of the quintessential trickster than Donnie. He's free now to leave. He could get voted out. He's free to die of coronavirus. He's free to split. He already did his thing. He's already appointed 1/3 of the Supreme Court, right? 3 out of 9. He's already done his thing. But this is Trickster, again, he's not a trickster, this is him, Trickster, our old friend. We didn't even recognize him. But there it is for all the poets who are always searching for new metaphors. I'm sure you already figured this out on your own, but I'm thick. It didn't dawn on me till a few months ago who he was. I thought he was some real estate developer. One of the reasons I left New York, came to California, was to get away from Donnie and Rudy. But Machiavelli, you know, who wrote The Prince, he's a rank amateur compared to Donnie. Machiavelli's got nothing on Donnie. Hey, Sue. I see Sue Coe in my lower left-hand corner. I didn't recognize you at first. Are you in the city or are you upstate New York somewhere?
Right.
It's so good to see you. It's been too long.
I know.
Well, this is one more great thing about this. It's a giant meeting place.
Yeah, I've been avoiding Zoom for the last 6 or 7 months, but it ain't half bad. I would almost call it a rare, appropriate use of technology.
We have to do that occasionally. I see in the chat, there's a question from Julia. Are you there and do you have a question that you want to, there you are.
Yeah, hi, good to see you, Peter and Colleen, and it's great to see so many wonderful people, and thank you for your fantastic presentations. My question isn't necessarily to one specific person, but it got me thinking about it when Colleen was talking about trying to find a new leftist aesthetic and what that might mean. So something I noticed about a lot of World War III illustrated artists is this attention to like a handmade aesthetic, you know, or in the examples that everyone showed, there was usually an emphasis on like printmaking and the hand. And even Colleen, I know you use digital material, but also I feel like there is something very handmade or hand-ish. I don't know. I'm not really explaining myself very well, but I guess I was interested in what everyone thought about how their form of leftist aesthetics is leftist. You know, like what about their style is, you know, melds with the form in a way that can only be represented as the way that it is, right? Because I think about this myself in my own work, so I was just kind of curious if anyone had thoughts about how they arrived at their specific style and what that style had to do with politics. So, thanks.
Oh, can I go? Can I say something?
Please.
Oh, traditionally, printmaking and muralism is the most socialist of the arts, in my opinion. It's something for the masses. You can make a print and give it to many, many, many people, as opposed to making one painting that a rich person's going to come and buy and hide it away. So when I was a teenager and I discovered this, I got way into printmaking. So those are my thoughts on that.
Colleen, do you want to unmute and respond?
Sure. So I want to clarify because I actually have something coming out where I talk about how leftism doesn't have a specific aesthetic, but like I don't think anything visually can specifically be leftist because aesthetics on their own are just decoration, but they come from tradition. And I think like what John was saying, like wood block specifically to me always speaks about this kind of like if you look in history, a lot of the leftist cartoons were done in this like kind of specific woodblock style, and I think it's very beautiful. And I love when modern artists like borrow from those aesthetics. I think sometimes we limit ourselves because we think, oh, like we can only reference very specific things in history because I feel like socialist history, leftist history is so hidden away. Like we kind of feel like we should make sure to reference it and honor it. And I think sometimes we can limit ourselves in imagining like a more modern take on these kind of things. And that's kind of what I meant, where it's like you don't like, I was thinking specifically, I think like I've seen like New Deal posters where they're specifically referencing Green New Deal posters where they're specifically like just taking the New Deal aesthetic, but it's like we're in the 21st century, why not do something a little bit different? So anyway, all that to say is that I think, especially I've noticed that I think artists who are also on the left politically are really drawn to things like printmaking, because it's so specifically a mass produced piece of art. And so I feel like for me, like I love printmaking, silkscreen, comics, because to me, it just seems like a populist form of art. I've never really been attracted to, like, I like fine art. Like, it's not like I don't like it, but like, I'm not attracted to making it because I'm very interested in the types of forms that can be mass produced to a lot of people. But we also live in a digital age where like so many things can be mass produced, so it kind of changes the definition of what that is. So that's kind of a weird answer, but like that's kind of what I think of.
I have a thought. I mean, my first impulse to that question is like, it's the human touch. You know, we're leftists. We want to be real. We want the world to be on a human scale and to be tactile, you know. I love handmade paintings, but, you know, I was never any good at schmoozing in galleries and selling them. So I found myself doing comics. And they were cheap comics. So initially they were black and white. I mean, now with like Instagram, you can mass produce anything, you know, assuming you have a computer, a camera, a scanner. Okay, those cost thousands of dollars, but somehow people manage. And the aesthetic of wood prints, as much as it's got its charm, it does feel retro, you know, because the modern artist can use modern techniques, you know, to reach a lot of people. But I still want there to be that human touch in the things that I distribute digitally. Peter, unmute yourself. Your mouth is talking, but we can't hear you.
I thought I unmuted. No, I was saying that World War III represents that very same thing, because for 41 years, we've been doing a physical magazine because we still are attached and attracted to this thing you can hold in your hand and read on the toilet. And that this is the very first issue that we're going to have an ebook version of in all this time. And, you know, we want to disseminate it as much as possible, but it's very much a similar aesthetic and idea of wanting something that you can hold in your hands and have that connection with, that we're all, you know, it's a warm thing. I mean, I guess it would be like vinyl versus, you know, digital recording. And obviously at a certain point, it's like, well, you know, that vinyl is vinyl made a little bit of a comeback, but that there's a certain point at which, yeah, in order for so many people are going to want it on so many different platforms, that it'll be a really good idea to have it, you know, in a way that it is actually sharing it like printmaking. It can reach a much wider audience around the world that way than actually the physical magazine can. But that attraction to the tactile thing is definitely still there.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
put a few cents here, and I'm gonna say not only do I think there is a left aesthetic, I think aesthetics do come from the left. I think if you look historically at art, generally it starts with a liberatory impulse and then eventually somebody co-opts it. And I think Eric makes a good point comparing Donald Trump to Abby Hoffman. I have noticed that as a guy who grew up with Abby, and like loved everything Abby did, you know, including the things that got people really mad. I immediately noticed that he was doing Abby. But that's the thing, he's doing Abby. He's not Abby. He is plagiarizing Abby Hoffman. He's doing things that Abby Hoffman and Lenny Bruce did a generation ago and using them for another purpose. And I think that if you look at fascism, it's a movement of plagiarism. It's a movement that drew on previous radical movements and previous populist tendencies and diverted them to their own means. And even if you look at, you know, all of the stodgy academic stuff that we all found really oppressive growing up, you know, Plato's Republic is pretty depressing, but the Symposium is like amazing. Like it's like 6 gay men talking about love. And they're not like, you know, not like Oscar Wilde, we all know he's gay. No, it's like, oh, I prefer men. Yeah, I do too. That's the whole thing. And like, this has been the establishment literature for hundreds of years. And yet people just kind of have found a way of avoiding that this is a gay book, you know, but that's what it is. So like, I think aesthetics comes from the left and it gets taken over by social forces that are conservative. So I got no problem with that, you know. As far as whether artwork is digital or analog, the really funny thing is that when people ask me, was that piece done digitally? Everything I do, if it's published, is done digitally because I can't anymore take a piece of artwork to a printer. He won't take it from me. I have to scan it and email it to him. He won't let me in his office anymore. You know, this is just the reality, is that all artwork is now digital. Even if you draw it by hand, you have to turn it into a digital file. So, you know, whether or not I add a gray tone in the computer is just kind of a detail. It's going to go through a digital process. Whether I alter it in that process or not, I'm going to have to touch it up. But anyways, I think that I don't see that there's that big a difference between us and all of the other history of art. I think it's all connected, and I think it all comes from a liberatory place. That's my
I noticed in the comments that
we can't hear you.
Okay, now can you hear me? Sorry, somewhere between mute and unmute. Carlo, I saw noticed in the things you wanted to say a little something. One of the contributors to the magazine for many years now. Can you unmute?
Carlo, you got to unmute yourself.
I think I did it. Can
Yes,
you all hear
we
me?
did.
Hello, everybody, and I'm so happy to be part of this issue with some of you. I'm so glad to see your faces for the first time after a while. I just wanted to point out something about Anita, which connects with something that Eric Drucker said about giving Trump more airtime. And so one of my thoughts, I mean, I did a Trump comic, of course, and it was in 2016, and it was all about him. And thinking that and I made it before the election, so I really thought that this will be the last time I have to do this. So after doing that, I just started focusing on the people who don't get airtime. And from my experience, I mean, using my experience, I started talking about immigrant issues and stories about leaders in other countries and why people have a reason to come here and how their governments end up corrupt and come here. And then ultimately, I did a comic that was really even more close to my heart, and I did a story about my mother, and is called Anita, and she goes to graduate school in her 50s. And when I was thinking about this issue being about the Green New Deal and about the possible future, I was thinking about how can we bring that down to kind of like a more tangible. How can I whittle that down to an idea that I can actually get my head around? Like I had just seen my mother go through this transformation of and gaining more confidence just from going to school, back to school. And I started thinking about how like someone like her will never get a movie made about her. She's not gonna get her own show on Netflix. I mean, unless at least I make it. But this is kind of like the story I wanted to say, to make the audience fall in love with this character. What if they could like root for this person who is on the other side is being called an invader, an alien, illegal alien or dangerous criminal, right? How can I turn that stereotype around and make her kind of like the center of like a romantic comedy, where like she will actually succeed at the end, and in spite of all of the obstacles, not only like real obstacles, like being able to afford school and all of that, but just like the obstacles, in society, it's the systemic obstacles, stereotypes, just like the just how people might feel about her race or her being an immigrant might affect if she gets a job or if she gets an apartment or if she's able to succeed in life. So that's kind of what that story is about. And thank you so much for listening to me for a moment. Oh, and please come back on November 10th when I come back to speak more about comics.
Does anybody have any other questions? Anyone? You can type them in, or you can just ask them.
I guess I have a question to John. Yes, I've been following you on Instagram, and I see how you've been going around talking about your art and your book. I, I think it's really cool how you know how you it has like a really amazing style, and I'm just wondering if you're going to continue doing more historical pieces about Puerto Rico. You know, that's my question.
Thanks for the kind words. I'm working on another 100-pager about Lolita Lebron and her travel to New York City and how she became radicalized. It's going to take 2 years, not 6 years this time, I promise. But thank you for the kind words.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Has this been recorded, and if so, how might we be able to access it?
Yeah, if the participants, agree to it, these events are put up on the YouTube channel for the Comics and Picture Story Symposium. So,
I hope they all agree.
We
All
all
of you, please agree.
Sue, agree? Yay. That would be great. Yeah, because there's a lot of people who are zoomed out, and this is a great moment. If it can stick around so that people can see it, that would be lovely.
I mean both the original presentations and this discussion. Yeah. Okay.
The whole thing, right, Ben?
yes, the whole.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Well, if that's the case, then thank you so much, Ben, for making this possible.
You're welcome.
And thanks everybody for coming. It's really great to see many familiar faces and see people who have heard about this, and all the people that have participated in the magazine. We'd fill up many Zooms if all the people who contributed attended. And thanks for making this all possible.
Thank you, Peter and Seth. Thank you. Next week, next Tuesday night, Ilan Manwash is speaking about comics and artificial intelligence. So that might be interesting.
Something similar to what we've been doing, actually.
What? Yes, in a way. See you next week. Thanks for coming.